Most murderers keep souvenirs from their victims as a way of remembering and reliving the experience. Here are some of the disturbing discoveries made after they were apprehended. Elizabeth Bathory. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Bathory, a Slovakian countess, killed multiple people. Since Bathory's atrocities occurred so long ago, it is more common to think of her as a mythical figure than as a real person. In addition to several torture tools she employed on her victims, the identities of more than 650 victims were discovered in her home. Bathory typically preyed on young female peasants, torturing them with needles inserted under their nails, freezing to death, blood draining, and other inhumane techniques. It is believed that Bathory drained her young victims' blood and saved it as a trophy so she could drink later to be more beautiful and stay young. Dennis Rader. The notorious bind, torture, kill murderer kept the driver's licenses of several of his victims as mementos. Harvey Glatman. The serial killer who went by the nickname Lonely Hearts Killer preyed on ladies in their homes in the late 1940s and early 1950s, robbing them and taking pictures. After being detained for a burglary, he relocated to Los Angeles and kept looking for victims in the Lonely Hearts sections of newspapers. He continued to photograph his victims as well. When he was apprehended, he confessed to his crimes and displayed a toolbox full of his photos to the police. Alexander Pichushkin. At least 49 individuals were killed by the Russian criminal Alexander Pichushkin, and maybe as many as 60. Totaling 64, the number of squares on a chessboard was his target number. Police discovered the chessboard at his house after he was eventually taken into custody, and all but one of the squares had been marked with dates. Each square's dates matched those of the murders he committed. Edmund Kemper. Sometimes known as the Coed Killer, he murdered 6 women. After leaving a path of horror through California, he killed his mother, taking her head and essaying it like he had done with numerous of his previous victims to put an end to his rampage. He used his mother's head as a dartboard as a final insult. Anatoly Onoprienko. Onoprienko, a criminal from Ukraine, claimed to have killed 52 people during his reign, many of them kids, leading the local media to dub him the Terminator. When he was apprehended, Ukrainian security personnel discovered he had an impressive arsenal. Additionally, he had the majority of his victims' underpants. Jerry Brudos. A few of Jerome Brudos' nick titles included the Lust Killer and the Shoe Fetish Slayer. The second nickname he went by became his grisly claim to fame. Brudos had a lifelong obsession with women's shoes, and when he started committing crimes, he frequently stole the victims' shoes. As his murders increased in severity in the late 1960s, one of his victims had her foot amputated so that Brudos could put shoes on it. When he was apprehended, he had numerous female body parts lying around his garage. He also browsed shoe catalogs while he was incarcerated. Dennis Nelson. Often known as the Kindly Killer, he was the British equivalent of Jeffrey Dahmer and was just as prolific and gruesome. He brought young men to his house, he killed them, dressed their bodies, and then assaulted them. When Nelson was arrested, it was because he tried to flush what turned out to be human meat and bones down the toilet, clogging a neighbor's sink. Investigators also discovered numerous plastic bags filled with various human parts and organs in his closet. Stanley Dean Baker. The so-called Yellowstone Killer and his accomplice Harry Straub were both apprehended following a car accident, and Baker surprised the authorities by stating, "I have a problem. I eat my own kind." He pulled several little white things out of his pockets to show them as proof. They were the finger bones of a victim. He had them with him in case he got hungry. Baker received a life sentence. John Christie. He was an English serial killer who claimed to have murdered at least 6 people. He even earned the nickname the Rillington Place Strangler for the street where he committed his atrocities as well as his method. Christie sublet his apartment at 10 Rillington Place to a number of tenants after he moved out, and they soon discovered 3 bodies in a wall behind his kitchen alcove. Shortly after, Christie was detained. Joel Rifkin. In the early 1990s, the Long Island criminal Joel Rifkin killed 17 workers over the course of 3 years. Rifkin led police to his home after being stopped for driving without a license plate, and he confessed to his crimes. There was a huge collection of victims' items in his bedroom, including underwear and bras, identification documents, jewelry, and a library card. Robert Hansen. For several years, Hansen kidnapped ladies, flew them to isolated regions of the icy tundra, and then he hunted them. Before being apprehended, he killed at least 17 different individuals. When he was captured, it was discovered that he had an extensive collection of the woman's items, including a significant quantity of jewelry. Additionally, he had paid for a large portion of his crime spree with insurance proceeds from the fictitious theft of real, valid hunting trophies. Jeffrey Dahmer. In addition to the other elements of his murders, the notorious Jeffrey Dahmer had a side hobby of keeping various pieces of his victims. It all began when he used acetone to preserve the head and private parts of one of his victims. He finished up with a freezer full of body parts. Additionally, he had a lobster pot loaded with body bits. Charles Albright. Albright had a disturbing habit of keeping his victims' eyeballs as souvenirs. John George Hay. Hay, an English criminal, was also known as the acid bat killer. After killing Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife Rose, Hay may have committed the cruelest act when he melted their bodies, fabricated a letter claiming to be a representative of their estate, and sold all of their belongings. Ahmad Suraji. Suraji, an Indonesian criminal who considered himself to be a sorcerer, murdered 42 women to acquire their magical abilities. He murdered them with a wire, and after performing a difficult rite, he buried their bodies. Other than the occurrence itself, the worst part of this was that the victim's saliva was drained and consumed. He was ultimately caught and put to death for his horrific acts. Ted Bundy. Bundy's practice of removing his victims' heads and displaying them in his apartment was one of the crimes committed against his nearly 36 victims. As if the first deed wasn't awful enough, he would also sleep close to their headless bodies. Ed Gein. A wastebasket and chairs made of skin, bowls made of skulls, masks made of human faces, countless organs in a box, and other horrors were discovered in his home. The fictitious characters from Psycho and Silence of the Lambs, among others, were influenced by Gein's atrocities. Alex Mangle. In the senseless killing of a Westchester, New York police officer, Alex Mangle was a suspect. He lost control of his vehicle while being pursued and slammed it into a wall. Once in jail, it was discovered that the car belonged to a woman who had vanished a few years before. The fact that the car contained weapons and what the police initially thought was a wig, but was actually the missing woman's scalp, which Mangle wore when he killed his next victim, firmly established him as the perpetrator. Ivan Millet. Millet killed at least 7 individuals and buried them in a woodland. Authorities discovered an incredible trove of stolen camping gear when they finally apprehended him, including tents, clothing, and sleeping bags. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.